Howdy, my name's Jason and I'm going to show you how to make bread using fresh ground wheat berries. So I've got my stone grinder right here. It's a Como Mio. I've got 50 grams of wheat berries, hard white wheat. I've got a little bit of starter. And I'm gonna grind it. So it's gonna be a little loud. So we go in. And now we got our freshly milled wheat. We've got a scale. Got our wheat flour. I used 50 grams of this. So we've got water. This is a kettle, but it's not, the water's not hot. It's regular room temperature. So just add 50 grams of water, equal amounts flour and water. Close enough. And then I'm going to add our starter. And it's about 25 grams. Doesn't really matter. Anywhere from like 10 to 25 grams is what I usually add for this little bit right here. Then we'll just mix it up. Mix it up really good. Make sure you have no dry bits in there. And make sure that the starter's incorporated well. And I've had my starter going, like it doesn't really matter how long you've had your starter going. If you're starting out from fresh, you want to follow directions for making starter, and you want like 5 days worth. And again, I only use freshly ground wheat now, so I don't use commercially bought flour. Basically just trying to get closer to this source, a little farther away from processed food stuff. I've been in the food and beverage industry for about 10 years. I started out in ultra-processed foods, so getting closer to the farm and the source of all this stuff is really been kind of a goal of mine since starting in the food industry. Well, now in the beverage industry, but same thing sort of applies. You want to get as close as possible to the source so you know where it's coming from. Then you make good choices about your food. So, got it all mixed up here. Just gonna put a cap loosely on. Make sure it can breathe, and gonna let it sit overnight, and in the morning we'll check to see if it's ready. Alrighty, it is the next morning, and check out my starter. It is doubled in size and is looking really healthy. So next what I'm gonna do is I've got 100 grams of wheat berries that I'm gonna mix with 100 grams of water, and I'm gonna reserve part of this for my next starter, but most of it I'm going to put into my pre-ferment for my dough. I don't like discarding starter and just found that there's no really good reason to discard it. So I just put it into the whole bread batch and get all that healthy yeast and flavor in there, and it seems to work out great. So I'm gonna grind it through my Como Mio mill and mix that with an equal parts water, so 100 grams flour and 100 grams water, and then most of my starter, and we're gonna let that set for a few hours. And since this is freshly ground wheat, it is really active. It's not gonna take all night to get going. I'll be able to cook this loaf of bread sometime this evening. I also have 50 grams of flour that I'm going to grind for to keep my starter going, and then I've got 400 grams, which is going to be my main bulk flour for the rest of the bread, and I'm going to mix it to about 80% hydration and let it autolyse basically for as long as the pre-ferment is going, because you can start the autolyse basically whenever you want, and all that does is just give it more time to build up the gluten structure with the while the flour hydrates with the water. So I'm going to grind that up right now, and then we'll get it mixing. So I got all my flour milled, and I milled it into these mason jars just to keep the dust from going everywhere. Helps a little bit. So the bulk flour, I'm going to just transfer into a 2-liter Cambro. Get that in there. And then I'm going to do 80% hydration with that. The pre-ferment, 100 grams of flour. I'm going to mix with 100 grams of water and most of my starter. And then I got flour for the next round starter. So we've got our scale. So for starter, tear out our scale here, get 50 grams of water. And then just about 10 grams of starter there. Then I'll give that a good mix and leave that. It's going to go in my fridge. Make sure all the flour is hydrated. Don't see any dry spots. You can look at the bottom, tell whether or not it's actually mixed in. So that's our starter ready to go, and it's just going to go into the fridge for whenever I need it next. And you can let it sit out on the counter for a few hours to make sure the yeast are still going, but those yeast are pretty active, so they'll be fine in the fridge. So the pre-ferment, and Terra scale, it's 100 grams of flour, so I'm adding 100 grams of water. And then all the leftover starters going in there too. And that's just going to help it ferment really fast. Because we don't want to waste any starter by discarding it, because that's just wasteful. That's in there. Give that a good mix. Again, making sure the starter's really well mixed in there. Making sure there are no dry bits of flour get into the bottom there. Make sure it's all really well mixed in. And sometimes this does take a while just to get down in there and make sure all that flour is really well mixed in. And again, you're helping the water get in contact with as much flour as possible, which helps it to hydrate and build those gluten structures. And it does take a while in there. So we got that. So that's going to double in size really quickly, actually. It's only going to take a few hours. So put a lid loosely on there. Set it on the back can. Got our bulk flour. Then tear that out. And then just mix that in with my hand. And with 100% extraction flour, which is just wheat berries that have been ground up, unsifted, this is actually really pleasant. The flour's warm from the milling, and it's going to soak up all that bran and germ is going to soak up the water. Just makes this really easy to mix. See, my hands really aren't that sticky, covered in flour, covered in dough actually. Again, getting out in the corners, make sure it's all mixed in. And freshly milled flour does like to soak up a lot of water, so that's why I find that the high hydration, 80% or more, works really well. But I've kind of settled on 80%. See how cohesive that already is compared to all-purpose or bread flour, which just is a super sticky mess. So again, this is just doing the autolyse. It's pretty well mixed in there. And again, my hands just really aren't that sticky. Cover that up. I'll wash my hands a little bit. Okay, so I got my autolyse going. Got my pre-ferment going. And basically I'm letting this autolyse just as long as this takes to double in size. Welcome back. It's been about 4 hours and check that out. The pre-ferment's going strong. Got the bulk stuff. Nice and already really stretchy. No yeast has been added to this, but it's already looking really good. So now, got 2% salt by weight. So I'm going by like roughly 500 grams total flour, so 2%, 10 grams of salt. So I'm going to add that. Now I'm going to add the pre-ferment to the rest of the flour. So I'll show you what that looks like. All right. Just getting all that out of here. All right, so I'm just gonna wet my hands a little bit and basically just poke that down. I'll fold up and over. Just gonna get this really well incorporated. All right, look how awesome this dough looks already. Then just squeeze it in to make sure that pre-ferment mixes well with the rest of the dough. Make sure it's really well incorporated. Now with the pre-ferment in there, it's already over 80% hydration, but still, like, look how clean this is. Look how well it sticks together. as a dough. Great gluten development. Just gonna make sure this is really well mixed in. And get ready for my bulk ferment to start. And basically I'm just gonna be doing, after I get this first mix going, roughly every 30 minutes I'm gonna be doing a fold. And obviously the pre-ferment, since it was 100% hydration, a little bit stickier, but still, again, like it's super not really that messy. It's great. And I love working with freshly milled flour. So it just feels better when I'm working with bread flour, commercially bought bread flour, or all-purpose. And that stuff's like really shaggy and gloopy and just gets everywhere. So I'm not really developing the gluten that much. I'm just incorporating the pre-ferment into the dough. Mostly it's just time is what actually develops the gluten, and just letting the water combine with the flour and hydrating it. So when I feel that it's pretty well mixed in, again, see how well it comes away from the bowl already. And this is just the first mixing. Again, hands relatively clean. It's going to wash off. Put a cover back on. In about half an hour, I'll come back and do another fold. Okay, so gone through a few folds during our bulk ferment, and now I'm going to do a final shape and putting it in a little ceramic Emile Henry loaf pan, loaf bowl, ceramic thing. So let's do our final fold, and then stick it in there. We're going to let it rise for like an hour, hour and a half, something like that. So let's get going. Just laying this all out here. It's all nice and stretchy. Pinch down these edges here. There's some tearing on the top. I don't really care about that. I'm not looking for a perfect loaf. I'm just looking for a nice, tasty, moderately well-risen one. Goes in here like that. Line of parchment paper. Cover it up and let it rise. Take the lid off our loaf here. Got a nice rise out of it. Let it rise for a few hours. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet the top of this. Hopefully it helps prevents it from sticking if it rises up too much while it's baking. Putting in some cold water on the top there. Putting that back over the top. Now I'm not scoring it or anything. I'm just looking for like a nice sandwich bread loaf to work with. And now the trick that I got for really working with freshly milled whole grain wheat is from Bittman Bread by Mark Bittman, one who popularized the no-knead bread in New York Times. And so for that recipe, he recommended going into a preheated Dutch oven. But for the whole grain, unsifted, freshly milled, he recommends starting from a cold oven. And that's basically what has worked the best for me. So I'm just gonna toss this in the oven there and start it preheating, and then start the cooking timer from there. So in you go. Set the oven to 485. Set a timer. I'm gonna set it for 30 minutes or so. That's when I'm gonna take off the lid, and then, yeah, should have a good rise ferment. That ceramic emmeal en riz pot really works well to keep enough steam in there so it'll have a good rise. And then just remove that so we can get some nice browning on the top. And then, yeah, we'll check back once we take it out. Alrighty, I am back. My bread is done. It was in the oven for an hour, and that's from a cold start. Halfway through, I took the lid off, and now 3-ingredient bread, just wheat, salt, and water. Probably the healthiest bread that you can find out there. So this is made from freshly milled stone ground wheat, milled right here in my apartment this morning. Check out that cross section, looks lovely. Get some butter from my Butterbell. Got a Butterbell, bro. Get that on our bread. So this has been sitting for about an hour after it came out of the oven. And there we go. Perfect slice of bread. Mmm. That's amazing.